President Trump is directing federal authorities to assist in recovery efforts for the Potomac River sewage spill. The spillage resulting from a section of the Potomac Interceptor sewer line collapsing last month is now resulting in an overflow of over 240 million gallons of wastewater. That's according to DC Water. While public health officials have said that the spillage did not impact drinking water quality, residents are encouraged to avoid contact altogether with the Potomac. And the president calls the spillage a massive ecological disaster, blaming local leadership for what he calls gross mismanagement. He adds that the federal government has no choice but to step in, noting that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, will play a key role in disaster response here. And the UK is sending its aircraft carrier strike group to the Arctic later this year. Now, this comes as President Trump is working on the U.S. acquiring Greenland. He's citing national security concerns here regarding increased Chinese and Russian military activity in that region. To dive into this, we're joined now by Taylor Hathorn, visiting fellow at the Center for American Safety and Security in the Independent Women's Forum. Taylor, thanks so much for joining us here. I want to get to a few things. Let's start off with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer making the announcement at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend on sending that strike group carrier to the Arctic.
We're building a fleet of warships to hunt Russian submarines and protect undersea infrastructure. We want to replicate this level of collaboration with other allies across the High North and the Baltic.
So, Taylor, as we can see, the U.S. has not acquired Greenland right now, but has this new development shown that Trump is achieving the goal of increasing security in the region?
Deterrence is always the goal whenever you're looking at these national security issues on really a global scale. I mean, just because we have the manpower to go in guns a-blazing as the United States doesn't mean that that is what we want to do. I mean, we want to solve this through diplomatic means, and we want our allies to step up and pay their fair share. And so this is great. I mean, we talked about Greenland for a reason. This administration has been very focused on Arctic security for a reason, because it's very important to our Golden Dome infrastructure and programming that we're developing out and what we're building. And you know, as the climate does change over time, so does the density of the ice in the Arctic. And so it's going to become an ever increasing battleground in the world order as we know it. And it's the same way with space. You know, there's all of these new frontiers that we're having to look at. And as Secretary Rubio said in his speech, it's not something that we want to do alone. This development, this industrialization of our military, making sure that we are on our toes when it comes to these adversaries and these conflicts. It's not something that we want to do alone, but we will. So it's good to see Britain stepping up.
Right, and not just Britain, but the rest of the European allies and NATO are really stepping up their defense spending here. Well, at the Munich Security Conference, European officials said that they're going to strengthen their military defenses yet again, become less reliant on the U.S., something that President Trump's been pushing them to do since even his first administration. Let's take a look at the clip from the European Commissioner praising its alliance with the U.S.
We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive.
This was for me very reassuring to listen to him. He said, we want a strong Europe in the alliance. And this is what we are working for intensively in the European Union. We have to be an independent Europe, not a Europe that is leaning on someone.
Taylor, how much has President Trump played a role in getting European countries to contribute more to their defense? And why is it important in the first place to become militarily independent from the U.S.?
Well, I think a lot of our European allies need to ask themselves where they want to stand in 10 years. I think a lot of the defense that happens in Europe is just closing your eyes and hoping that you don't have a conflict with Russia and hoping that you don't have a conflict with China. But that's not the reality at play. You know, hope is not a deterrent strategy. It's something that a deterrent strategy is something that you have to plan for and you have to mitigate and you have to know your enemy. And in order to know your enemy, it's to be aware and honest about who they are. And China is no friend of ours. Russia is no friend of ours. And the European European nations would be smart to align themselves with a country, the United States, that shares their same values. And Secretary Rubio really hit on that, but a lot of our European allies need to really do some inward reflecting and look at their landscape of what they've been operating on in their nations the last 10 or so years. I mean, yes, I will give it to them. Many of these nations, especially in NATO, have committed to getting up to 5% of their GDP towards their national security spending. So that's great. Many of these nations as a whole, all of Europe as a whole, has increased their defense spending by 80%, I believe, since before the war in Ukraine started. So they're doing a lot. But I think in order for these things to affect actual change, they need to be honest with themselves about why and how they got to where they were. Right now, Great Britain has the lowest active army. I believe they only have around 70,000 full-duty, active-duty personnel. That's the lowest number since the 1700s. Is that really a Great Britain that's postured to fight Russia if it comes to it, if the United States pulls back? I don't think so. So I think these allies of ours need to do a lot of self-reflecting, and it does seem like they're doing that now.
I want to get now to Iran, a bit more immediate pressing issue. The Trump administration is working to make a deal with Iran to disband its nuclear program. Now, U.S. and Iran envoys are meeting and negotiating in Geneva tomorrow on this, but at the same time, we have the U.S. building up forces near Iran, on Friday sending another aircraft carrier to the Middle East. That same day, Trump said that a regime change in Iran would be the best outcome. What scale of military operation, Taylor, could the U.S. be considering, and is that the likely outcome?
Well, right now you've got the USS Gerald Ford, which is the largest warship that you have. And then you've got the Lincoln heading over there, which is a huge, huge fleet. There's about 6,000 military personnel on that. So this really shows that the United States is standing up forces that we will use if necessary. I have brothers myself who were in the military for many years. This is not the outcome that you want to see, but Iran is really dictating, and the IRGC and the Ayatollah are really dictating our response here, because yes, while this is for many of us about what the protesters are going through when they're protesting the regime, the Islamic regime in Iran, what this is about for the administration is about national security and Iran's unwillingness to not just lay down the idea of them bolstering up a nuclear weapons program, but also the relationship that they have with their proxies, not even in their hemisphere, but in our hemisphere. When you look back at what happened with Maduro a couple of weeks ago now, and Iran had a huge presence. The IRGC had a huge presence in that conflict and in that area. And so they have their proxies and their tentacles all over the world, and the administration knows this, and they're being smart to try to negotiate with Iran. But my personal opinion is there's no negotiating with a tyrannical regime. They're going to do what they want to do anyway. I do believe that the deterrence is the best option if we've got it. Kudos to the Trump administration for trying to work through that, but I don't have high hopes about these negotiations.
And while these negotiations are taking place, we have more protests and more people dying in the streets at the hands of the regime in Iran. But before we move on, I want to get to our last topic here and your response on this. Most members of Congress back Taiwan in protecting itself from an invasion by the Chinese Communist Party, which it said it wants to take over by 2027. The Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez appears to stumble when questioned at the Munich Security Conference. Let's take a look.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is this is, of course, a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point.
She's talking about a long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity, but what's your response to this reaction? Do you think that there's a wing that won't support defending Taiwan from the CCP among AOC fellow progressives?
So my response to this is the way that she just stammered is exactly why I don't go on TV talking about issues that I'm not aware of and that I don't study about, because it's very easy to not just get a Freudian slip on something that you don't really mean to say, but also this just shows that she's green on foreign policy, that she isn't as apt to be able to discuss these issues, and maybe she's not ready for a conference like Munich. You know, what she could have talked about was the importance of Taiwan in the first island chain. What she could have talked about was why Taiwan is important to our defense industrial base in the United States. What she could have talked about is the many raging battles that we have across many frontiers with China at the moment. What she could have talked about was the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act that we have. She could have talked about many of these things, but instead she just kind of waffled because she's not really sure what she's talking about. And if this is the left's best home run hitter that they have, I'm not too worried about the upcoming elections, at least when it comes to our foreign policy in the coming years. So I would really like to see the left get a better handle on their position on a couple of foreign policy issues. I would really like for us to understand that national security issues are a bipartisan or nonpartisan issue. This is something that we all want, left, right, and center, is the safety and security for Americans, whether it is here on our homeland or around the world. And that is what we are all fighting for. And so I think AOC or Congresswoman, AOC needs to get her talking points straight on her position points on many of these conflicts.
I'm sure she'll be ready to answer that question if asked again in the future. Taylor Hathorn, thank you so much for your insights here today. Really appreciate it.